The envelope was cream-colored. Thick paper, expensive paper. The kind people use when they want cruelty to look elegant. My father held it between 2 fingers while the wedding band played soft jazz behind him. Crystal glasses clinked somewhere across the ballroom. Somebody laughed near the champagne tower. And right in the center of my sister's wedding reception with 200 guests watching, and at least 3 cameras pointed at my face, he said words I don't think I'll ever forget. This is from all of us. The room went quiet in that strange way wealthy rooms do. Not silence exactly. More like people inhaling and waiting for entertainment. My sister Emily stood beside him in a satin white gown worth more than my first military paycheck. Her lips curled slightly before she caught herself. She already thought she knew how this moment would end. I could see it in her eyes. She thought I would cry. She thought years of humiliation, rejection, and loneliness would finally break open in front of everyone she knew. Instead, I took the envelope calmly. I opened it. Read every word. Then I folded the letter once, twice, slid it into my purse, and smiled. That smile changed the entire night. Because nobody in that ballroom knew something I'd spent 6 years preparing for. Not even my father. Especially not my father. And as I looked into his suddenly uncertain eyes, I realized something almost funny. For the first time in my life, he was afraid of me. I arrived in Charleston 3 hours before the ceremony. Rain clouds hung low over the harbor, turning the sky silver gray above the water. The driver who picked me up from the airport kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, probably because I was wearing my dress blues. People always stared at the uniform. Especially older people. Especially in the South. The gold buttons were polished. My ribbons perfectly aligned. My dark hair twisted into a regulation bun so tight it gave me a headache. I'd spent 21 years in the Army learning how to carry myself without showing discomfort. By now, composure felt more natural than breathing. But the second we pulled up to the hotel, that old familiar heaviness settled into my chest. The Ashcroft Hotel looked like something from an old movie. White columns, massive chandeliers, valets moving like synchronized dancers. Emily would love a place like this. My sister had spent her entire life believing appearances were reality. As I stepped out of the car, I heard someone say behind me, "That must be the military sister." Not Rebecca. Not daughter. Not family. Just the military sister. I smiled politely anyway. That was another thing the Army taught me. You learn how to survive rooms where nobody wants you there. Inside the ballroom smelled like roses and expensive perfume. The wedding planner hurried past carrying a clipboard while servers floated through the crowd with trays of champagne. Everything glittered. Everything looked perfect. And none of it felt warm. I spotted my father near the bar almost immediately. Franklin Whitmore. 70 years old, silver hair, navy tuxedo, the same cold posture he'd carried since my mother died 15 years earlier. For a moment I thought maybe age had softened him. Then his eyes met mine. Nothing. No smile. No pride. No, you made it. Just a brief nod like I was another guest. I walked toward him anyway. Hi, Dad. You're late. I checked my watch automatically. The ceremony starts in 40 minutes. You still could have come earlier. Emily's been stressed. Of course she had. Emily was always stressed when attention shifted away from her for more than 8 seconds. I came as soon as my flight landed. His eyes moved over my uniform. You really wore that. There it was. Not even disguised. I kept my voice even. It's formal military protocol for events like this. You could have worn a normal dress. A normal dress. I almost laughed. 21 years serving this country, 2 overseas deployments, a Bronze Star, and somehow in his mind the embarrassing thing was the uniform. I think Mom would have liked it, I said quietly. That landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened instantly. He still couldn't handle hearing about her. Before he could answer, Emily appeared beside us like a perfume commercial come to life. Blonde curls, diamond earrings, white satin wrapped around a body sculpted more by vanity than exercise. She air-kissed my cheek, carefully avoiding actual contact. Rebecca, she said brightly, you made it. Congratulations. Oh my God, everyone's been talking about your outfit. Outfit. Not uniform. Not service. Just outfit. I noticed the cameraman drifting nearby pretending to film centerpieces while aiming directly at us. Emily noticed too. That was intentional. Everything with her was intentional. "You're sitting at table 14, she added casually. I blinked. 14. That was the only place left. Table 14 sat near the kitchen doors. Furthest possible table from family. I looked around the ballroom. My father's golf buddies sat closer to the head table than I did. Something cold slid quietly through my stomach. But I only nodded. Sounds good. Emily looked disappointed by my reaction. She'd expected visible hurt. Emily always preferred her cruelty witnessed. "Well," she said, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her dress, "try not to disappear before the cake this time." That one hit closer. 5 years earlier, I had left Thanksgiving dinner early after listening to Emily joke about soldiers having government-funded trauma. My father laughed harder than anyone. I never told them that 2 weeks before that dinner, I'd lost a 19-year-old private under my command overseas. Some things become too sacred to explain to careless people. "I'll stay," I said. Emily smiled triumphantly. Good. Then she walked away. As I watched her greet guests with practiced perfection memories, came back whether I wanted them or not. Emily at 16 getting a brand new Mustang while I worked double shifts at a diner to buy second-hand combat boots before enlistment. Emily crying because her college apartment was too small while I slept in desert tents that smelled like dust and diesel fuel. Emily calling me during my deployment not to ask if I was safe but to ask for money because Dad's business was struggling again. And every single time, I sent it. Money for tuition. Money for hospital bills. Money to stop foreclosure. I emptied savings accounts while eating military cafeteria food under fluorescent lights halfway across the world. Not once did they thank me without sounding inconvenienced by it. After Mom died, I became useful instead of loved. That realization took years to admit. A waiter passed carrying champagne. I took a glass and stepped toward the seating display near the ballroom entrance. Rebecca Whitman. Not Whitmore. Whitman. Wrong last name entirely. I stared at the card for several seconds. Then I laughed softly under my breath. At some point, humiliation becomes almost boring. A woman beside me shifted awkwardly. I'm sure it was just a typo. Of course, I said. But it wasn't. Across the room, Emily looked directly at me and smiled. The ceremony passed in a blur of organ music and fake tears. I stood when instructed, clapped when expected, smiled in photographs where nobody bothered placing me near the family. By the time the reception began, I already knew something was coming. You don't survive military intelligence work for years without learning how to recognize coordinated behavior. The whispers. The glances. My father disappearing repeatedly with Emily's husband. The way several relatives avoided eye contact completely. Something had been planned. I just didn't know exactly what. Not yet. Dinner arrived. Filet mignon, roasted potatoes, expensive wine I barely tasted. Emily floated from table to table performing happiness for the cameras, while her new husband Daniel looked increasingly overwhelmed. Poor man. He still thought he married into a normal family. Then halfway through dessert, my father stood. The microphone squealed softly in his hand. Before we continue, he announced, there's one more thing that needs to be addressed tonight. Every instinct inside me went still. He walked toward my table slowly. Deliberately. And when he stopped beside me, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. This, he said evenly, is from all of us. My father held the envelope like a man presenting evidence in court. Not shaking, not angry, calm. That was the dangerous thing about him. Franklin Whitmore never raised his voice when he wanted to hurt someone. He believed cruelty worked best when delivered politely. Every conversation in the ballroom faded into a low hum around me. Forks stopped moving. Chairs shifted softly across marble floors. Even the jazz trio near the dance floor seemed to lose rhythm for a second. I looked up at him while he stood over my table. The cameras were ready. Of course they were. Emily had positioned them perfectly. One near the cake table, one beside the dance floor, one directly behind the head table with a clean angle toward me. This wasn't spontaneous humiliation. It was produced humiliation. Carefully staged. I took the envelope from his hand without speaking. The paper felt heavy. Inside, several sheets were folded together with unnatural precision. I noticed multiple signatures immediately before I even began reading. My father remained standing there while I unfolded the pages. He wanted an audience for this. wanted everyone to watch my face as the words landed. So I gave him exactly what he asked for. I read every line slowly. Rebecca. After years of disappointment, distance, hostility, and embarrassment brought upon this family through your choices and behavior, we have decided it is healthier for everyone to formally separate ourselves from you. You have made it clear that your loyalty belongs elsewhere. Therefore, from this point forward, you are no longer considered part of this family. Please do not attend future holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, or family gatherings. Do not contact us unless legally necessary. We release you from any further obligation to this family, and we ask the same in return. Signed, Franklin Whitmore, Emily Whitmore Carter. And beneath their names were others. My Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, 2 cousins, even my mother's older sister. I stared at the signatures for several quiet seconds. Not because I was shocked, because suddenly everything made sense. The strange tension, the avoidance, the rehearsed smiles, Emily's excitement every time a camera drifted toward me. This was the performance, the final rejection, and the truly pathetic part. They thought this letter gave them power. I lifted my eyes slowly toward Emily across the ballroom. She stood frozen beside her husband, one manicured hand lightly touching her champagne glass. Waiting. Almost trembling with anticipation. She wanted tears. She wanted me to run out of the ballroom humiliated while guests whispered behind folded napkins about the unstable military daughter. I could practically hear the version of the story she'd tell afterward. Rebecca caused a scene. Rebecca embarrassed herself. Rebecca was always emotionally difficult. That had always been the family strategy. Hurt me first, then rewrite my reaction as the problem. But somewhere during my second deployment overseas, something inside me had changed permanently. Once you've informed parents their son isn't coming home, once you've watched 19-year-old soldiers bleed out asking for their mothers, once you've spent nights listening for mortar fire in complete darkness, people like Emily stop feeling intimidating. I finished reading, carefully folded the pages once, then again, and slipped them into my purse. The silence inside the ballroom deepened. My father frowned slightly, confused already. That almost made me smile. Then I looked directly at him and said calmly, "Thank you for finally putting it in writing." The expression on his face shifted almost invisibly. Just for a second. But I saw it. Uncertainty. Around us, guests exchanged awkward glances. Somebody coughed near the back wall. One of the servers stopped walking entirely. This wasn't unfolding the way they expected. Emily recovered first. She laughed softly into her microphone. "Well, I think honesty is important in families." Families. Interesting word choice from a woman who once mailed my deployment care package back unopened because it arrived during her birthday weekend. I stood slowly from my chair. The room tracked the movement immediately. "I agree," I said. Emily's smile tightened. My father crossed his arms. "Then maybe this gives everyone closure." Closure. That word nearly unlocked something ugly in me. Because closure implied mutual damage. Mutual failure. But there had never been anything mutual about what they did. After Mom died, my father stopped seeing me as a daughter. I became a resource, a backup account, a dependable obligation he could emotionally manipulate whenever necessary. And Emily learned from him early. I remembered being 23 years old in Afghanistan when Emily called crying because her credit card had been declined at a luxury spa resort in Arizona. "I'm literally stranded," she sobbed dramatically over satellite connection. I wired her $3,000 2 hours later. 3 weeks afterward, one of my soldiers lost both legs from an IED. Emily never asked about him. Never asked about me. Only whether I could help with another expense when I got home. I should have stopped then. But grief changes people. Especially daughters trying desperately to earn love from emotionally unavailable fathers. My father finally spoke again. "You've always blamed this family for your own decisions." There it was. The rewriting. He'd spent years telling relatives I abandoned the family for military glory, as if enlistment at 18 had been selfish instead of necessary. What he never mentioned was that our electricity had been shut off twice after Mom died. Or that he spent most insurance money renovating his office while I rationed groceries at home. Or that Emily somehow received a brand new convertible 6 months later. I looked around the ballroom slowly. Most guests wouldn't know any of that. They only saw a decorated army officer standing awkwardly at her sister's wedding after receiving a family rejection letter. And for a brief moment I almost pitied them. Because they had no idea what room they'd walked into tonight. Emily stepped closer now, still smiling for appearances. "Rebecca, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," I said gently. "I think public honesty was your idea." A few guests lowered their eyes immediately. Others leaned forward. My father's face hardened. "Don't start something tonight." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Start something. As though he hadn't just handed his own daughter a formal exile notice during dessert. I reached for my champagne glass and took a slow sip. The bubbles burned pleasantly against my throat. Then I looked directly at Emily's husband for the first time all evening. Daniel looked pale. Confused. Uneasy in a way that told me one important thing immediately. He didn't know. Not all of it anyway. Interesting. Emily noticed where I was looking and quickly moved between us emotionally, if not physically. "Daniel, honey, it's fine. This is just family tension." Family tension. That phrase covered a multitude of sins in wealthy Southern families. Fraud. Manipulation. Theft. Years earlier, I might have stayed quiet to protect appearances. But appearances had stopped mattering to me the night I discovered my father had taken out loans under my Social Security number. I still remembered sitting inside my tiny apartment near Fort Bragg staring at collection notices I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed identity theft from a stranger. Then I found the signatures. My father's handwriting disguised badly beneath mine. The accounts traced directly to his business. And when I confronted him privately, he cried. Actually cried. Said he was desperate. Said Emily needed help. Said family sacrifices for family. Then he promised to fix everything. Instead, he told relatives I'd become unstable after deployment. Classic Franklin Whitmore. Destroy the daughter. Protect the image. I set my champagne glass down carefully. "You know," I said quietly, "there's something strangely comforting about this." Emily blinked. "What?" I touched the purse containing the letter. "This saves me time." Now my father looked genuinely uneasy. "Good." Because for 6 years, while they thought I was silently absorbing humiliation, I had been collecting everything. Bank statements, loan documents, insurance transfers, forged signatures, emails, hidden accounts. Every lie, every theft, every carefully buried secret. Military intelligence teaches patience in ways civilians rarely understand. You learn how to wait without revealing you're waiting. And suddenly standing in that ballroom filled with roses and crystal and fake smiles, I realized something almost beautiful. They truly believed tonight was the end of the story. I looked at my father, then at Emily, then at the cameras still recording. And finally I smiled again. "You really should have waited until after dessert." Nobody spoke after that. For a few long seconds the ballroom sat frozen beneath the warm chandelier light, while my words settled over the room like smoke. "You really should have waited until after dessert." My father stared at me carefully now, not angry anymore. Calculating. That expression used to terrify me when I was younger. It meant he was trying to determine how much control he still had over a situation. And for the first time in his life, he couldn't read me. Emily recovered faster than he did. She laughed lightly into the microphone, though I could hear strain underneath it now. "Oh my God," she said, glancing around at the guests. "Can we not do drama tonight? Rebecca always turns everything into some giant emotional production." A few nervous chuckles scattered across the ballroom. Not many. People were uncomfortable now. Good. I stepped away from my table slowly and picked up a champagne flute from a passing tray. The cold glass pressed against my fingertips while I walked toward the center of the room. Toward the microphones. Toward the cameras. Emily's smile flickered. "Rebecca, you wanted public honesty," I said calmly. "I think that's fair." Daniel shifted beside her. "Maybe we should." "No," Emily snapped too quickly. That caught his attention immediately. "Interesting." I took the microphone gently from her hand. The ballroom speakers hummed softly. For a second I looked out across the crowd, men in tuxedos, women draped in pearls and silk, my relatives avoiding eye contact, friends of the family pretending not to stare. And suddenly I wasn't nervous anymore. I'd spoken at military funerals. I'd briefed generals. I'd stood in hospital corridors telling mothers their sons died bravely. This room was nothing. I wasn't planning to make a speech tonight, I began quietly. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I should come. The room stayed silent. My sister and I grew up about 6 miles from here in a little white house with a broken porch swing my mother refused to throw away. I smiled faintly at the memory. Mom used to say broken things deserved patience. That softened the room instantly. People leaned in now. Because unlike Emily's rehearsed perfection, grief sounds real when it comes from someone who's lived inside it. She loved this city, loved family dinners, loved holidays, loved traditions. I paused briefly. She also believed family protected each other. My father shifted where he stood. He knew where this was going now. Too late. After she died, things changed. Emily crossed her arms. Rebecca. No, it's okay, I said gently. We're being honest tonight. I turned slightly toward the guests again. When I joined the army at 18, my father told people I did it because I was rebellious. A small smile touched my mouth. The truth is, our power had been shut off twice, and I couldn't afford college. Silence. Real silence now. Not performance silence. My father's jaw tightened visibly. I sent money home every month for years, I continued. For medical bills, mortgage payments, Emily's tuition. I glanced toward my sister. Her car payment once. Several heads turned toward Emily. Daniel looked at her sharply. She immediately shook her head. She's exaggerating. I kept receipts. That landed. The atmosphere changed physically after that. You could feel it. The subtle movement of people emotionally leaning away from my father and sister. Emily tried smiling again, but panic had begun creeping around the edges. You're seriously doing this at my wedding? I looked at her steadily. You handed me a family exile letter during dinner.